Workers don't lose their eyesight because they forgot their goggles. They lose it because of a tiny shortcut they think is harmless. And today, you're about to see the truth behind the PPE shortcut, responsible for nearly 80% of workplace eye injuries. If you've ever seen someone lift their safety glasses just for a second, this story will feel uncomfortably familiar, because that 1 second is all it takes for a life to change forever. Imagine a worker grinding a metal plate. Sparks fly, dust floats, and the air is filled with microscopic projectiles. He's wearing his goggles, but they're fogging up. He lifts them slightly to wipe the sweat. In that exact moment, a particle smaller than a grain of sand shoots straight into his eye. He doesn't even feel it at first, but hours later, he's in the emergency room, unable to open his swollen, tearing eye. That tiny shortcut has now become a permanent injury. This is the hidden danger most workers never think about. PPE doesn't fail because it's weak. It fails because humans take shortcuts. And the most common shortcut is lifting, adjusting, or partially removing eye protection while still inside the hazard zone. Workers believe they're safe because the task is almost done. They think nothing will happen in the last few seconds, but statistically, those last few seconds are the most dangerous. Eye injuries don't always come from dramatic accidents. They come from dust, chips, splinters, chemical mist, and flying debris that you can't even see. When goggles are lifted even a little, the seal breaks. The protection drops to zero. And the hazard doesn't need permission to enter. It only needs an opening. Today, in this 4-part series, we're going to break down why workers take this shortcut, what happens inside the eye during an injury, how to eliminate the behavior, and the real stories that prove how fast things can go wrong. By the end, you'll understand eye safety in a way most workplaces never teach. And if you're a supervisor, trainer, or worker, this knowledge will change how you look at PPE forever. Workers don't lift their eye protection because they want to get hurt. They lift it because their brain convinces them that nothing bad will happen in the next few seconds. This is the psychology behind most eye injuries. And once you understand it, you'll see why this shortcut is so common in every industry, from construction to manufacturing to maintenance. The human brain is wired to reduce discomfort. When goggles fog up, press against the nose, or trap sweat, the brain immediately looks for relief. And the fastest relief is lifting the PPE. Even if it's just for a moment, that moment becomes the perfect opening for a hazard to strike. Workers don't think about risk during discomfort. They think about comfort first and safety second. Another reason is familiarity. When a worker performs the same task every day, I start believing the task is safe simply because nothing bad has happened before. This is called risk normalization. The hazard is still present, but the worker's mind stops respecting it. So when goggles slip or fog, they lift them without fear. They assume the environment is harmless because they've survived it many times. Peer influence also plays a major role. If one worker lifts their goggles and nothing happens, others start copying the behavior. Soon, it becomes a silent culture. No one says it out loud, but everyone believes it's okay to adjust PPE inside the hazard zone. This cultural shortcut spreads faster than any safety rule can stop it. Then comes the almost done mindset. When a task is close to finishing, workers relax. Their guard drops. They think the danger has passed. But statistically, the final moments of a job are when workers rush, lose focus, and take shortcuts. Eye injuries often occur when workers believe they're seconds away from completion. Fogging is another major trigger. When goggles fog, visibility drops. Workers feel blind. They panic. Instead of stepping out of the hazard zone, they lift the goggles right where they stand. That tiny lift exposes the eyes to dust, chits, sparks, and chemicals that don't wait for permission. They enter instantly. Understanding these psychological triggers is the first step in eliminating the shortcut. Because PPE compliance isn't just about rules, it's about human behavior. And if we don't address the reasons behind the shortcut, workers will continue lifting their goggles, even in the most well-trained workplaces. When a worker lifts their goggles, even slightly, the eye becomes exposed to hazards that behave far differently than people imagine. Most workers think eye injuries come from big, visible objects. But the truth is that the most damaging particles are microscopic. They travel fast, they bounce unpredictably, and they enter the eye before a worker even realizes what happened. To understand why this shortcut is so dangerous, we need to look at what actually happens inside the eye during an injury. The eye is one of the most delicate organs in the body. The cornea, the clear front layer, is only 0.5 millimeter thick. It has no fat, no muscle, and no protection except tears. When a particle hits the cornea, it doesn't just scratch the surface. It can embed itself like a tiny needle. Even a particle smaller than a grain of sand can cause inflammation, infection, and permanent scarring. And once the cornea is damaged, vision can blur for life. Metal particles behave even worse. When a spark from grinding enters the eye, it can melt slightly due to heat. Once inside, it cools and sticks to the cornea or sclera. The body reacts by forming rust rings. These rings must be drilled out by a specialist. Workers often think a spark is harmless because it's small. But inside the eye, that spark becomes a foreign object that the body cannot remove on its own. Chemical mist is another silent threat. Workers assume chemicals only harm the eye when splashed, but mist and vapor can cause burns without any visible contact. When goggles are lifted, even for a second, the mist reaches the eye's surface and begins breaking down tissue. The damage might not appear immediately. Hours later, the worker feels pain, redness, and blurred vision. By then, the injury has already progressed. Dust behaves differently. It floats, drifts, and enters the eye without force. But once inside, it scratches every time the worker blinks. These micro-scratches accumulate, causing irritation and infection. Workers often rub their eyes, making the injury worse. A simple dust particle can turn into a severe corneal abrasion just because goggles were lifted for a moment. The most dangerous part is that the eye cannot defend itself. It has no protective skin, no thick barrier, and no ability to heal quickly. A tiny injury can take days or weeks to recover, and repeated exposure can lead to permanent vision loss. This is why the shortcut of lifting goggles is so risky. The hazards don't need strength, they only need access. Understanding how the eye reacts to injury helps workers realize that PPE is not optional. It is the only barrier between a fragile organ and an environment filled with invisible threats. And once the eye is damaged, no shortcut is worth the cost. Stopping the PPE shortcut that causes most eye injuries isn't about shouting rules or handing out more goggles. It's about changing behavior, environment, and habits. Workers don't respond to warnings. They respond to systems that make the safe choice easier than the shortcut. And that begins with understanding how to eliminate the triggers that cause workers to lift their eye protection in the first place. The first step is controlling fogging. Fogging is the #1 reason workers lift goggles. When visibility drops, they panic. Anti-fog coatings, proper ventilation, and selecting the right type of eye protection can reduce fog dramatically. When workers can see clearly, they stop lifting their goggles. Comfort removes the temptation. Next is training workers to step out of the hazard zone before adjusting PPE. This single habit can prevent most injuries. Workers must understand that PPE is not meant to be touched inside the danger area. If goggles slip, fog, or feel uncomfortable, they should walk out, adjust them safely, and return. This simple rule creates a physical barrier between discomfort and danger. Supervisors play a major role. When supervisors ignore PPE shortcuts, workers assume the behavior is acceptable. But when supervisors consistently correct even small lifts or adjustments, workers quickly learn that the shortcut is not tolerated. Consistency builds culture, and culture prevents injuries more effectively than any poster or policy. Another powerful method is storytelling. Real incidents change behavior faster than statistics. When workers hear how a tiny particle blinded someone during a quick PPE adjustment, the shortcut suddenly feels dangerous. Stories create emotional impact, and emotional impact creates lasting change. Engineering controls also help. Barriers, shields, extraction systems, and enclosed workstations reduce airborne hazards. When fewer particles are present, the risk drops. But even with engineering controls, PPE must remain sealed. Hazards don't disappear completely. They only reduce. Peer accountability is another tool. When workers remind each other to keep goggles sealed, the culture becomes self-sustaining. Safety becomes a shared responsibility instead of a rule enforced from above. Peer influence can eliminate shortcuts faster than formal training. Finally, workers must understand the long-term consequences of eye injuries. Vision loss affects every part of life. Driving, reading, working, and even recognizing faces become difficult. When workers realize the true cost of a shortcut, they begin valuing PPE as a life-preserving tool, not an inconvenience. Eliminating the PPE shortcut is not about perfection. It's about awareness, habits, and culture. When workers understand the risks, when supervisors reinforce the rules, and when systems support safe behavior, the shortcut disappears. And with it, most eye injuries disappear too. Eye injuries don't happen because workers are careless. They happen because shortcuts feel harmless. But now you know the truth behind the tiny lift that causes massive damage. If you're a worker, keep your goggles sealed. If you're a supervisor, correct the shortcut every time. And if you value your vision, remember this: your eyes don't get a second chance. Follow Workplace HSE Explained for more real-world safety lessons that protect you, your team, and your future.